She called the most dangerous man in Chicago at 1:07 in the morning. Not because she trusted him, but because she had no one left. Blood dripped from her split lip onto marble tile. Behind the locked bathroom door, the man who claimed to love her was ripping the apartment apart, screaming her name like a curse. 6 years of bruises. 6 years of silence. Tonight, something inside her finally broke. But what she didn't know, what nobody knew, was that this single phone call would ignite a war that would burn through every dark corner of the city and leave bodies in its wake. Stay with me until the end. Drop a like, leave a comment with the city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. The rain started around 11, a mean Chicago downpour that turned the streets into black mirrors and sent the last of the bar crowd scrambling for cabs. By midnight, the gutters along Michigan Avenue were choking, water pooling under streetlights in dirty orange halos, and the city had that wet electric smell it gets right before something terrible happens. Serafina Vale sat on the edge of a king-size bed in a 22nd floor apartment she didn't pay for, wearing a dress she didn't choose, watching the skyline blur behind rain-streaked glass. The television was on but muted, some late-night comedian moving his mouth without sound. She held a glass of water in both hands, not drinking, just holding it because her fingers needed something to grip. Behind her, the bathroom faucet dripped. Somewhere down the hall, Nolan Graves was finishing his fourth whiskey. She could track his moods by sound. The scrape of the bar stool meant he was restless. The click of the bottle on granite meant he was pouring again. The silence. The silence was the worst part, because silence meant he was thinking, and when Nolan thought, someone always paid for whatever conclusions he reached. Tonight, the silence had lasted 11 minutes. Serafina set the glass down on the nightstand. Her hand trembled once, a small vibration she couldn't control no matter how many times she practiced being still. She'd learned to manage everything else, the pitch of her voice, the angle of her posture, the exact expression that made Nolan feel respected without making him feel challenged. 6 years of living with a man like that turns you into a kind of translator, someone fluent in violence, reading syllables for threat level the way other people check weather apps. She heard his footsteps in the hallway. Not heavy, not stumbling, controlled, deliberate, which meant the whiskey hadn't dulled him. It had sharpened him. He appeared in the doorway, tall, jaw tight, tie loosened, the top two buttons of his shirt undone, exposing the thick cords of his neck. His eyes, pale blue, the color people always called beautiful, were flat, dead calm. Serafina knew that look. That was the look right before the weather changed. "Who were you texting?" His voice was low, almost gentle. That was another trick she'd learned to decode. The quieter Nolan spoke, the closer you were to the edge. "Nobody," she said. "I was looking at the weather." "The weather? It's supposed to rain through Tuesday." He leaned against the doorframe, rolling his sleeves to his forearms, slowly, methodically, the way a man rolls his sleeves when he wants you to watch. "Give me your phone." "Nolan, give me the phone, Serafina." She handed it to him. She always handed it to him. Resistance had a cost she'd calculated too many times, and the math never worked in her favor. Nolan scrolled through the screen, his thumb moving with that invasive precision she hated, checking texts, call logs, browsing history, even her photo library. She watched him do it and felt what she always felt. A deep, rotting shame that didn't belong to her but had been planted so many times it had grown roots. He tossed the phone onto the bed. "Stand up." "What?" "I said stand up." She stood. Her legs were bare. The dress ended just above her knees, a black thing with thin straps that Nolan had bought last month because he liked the way it looked when they went to dinner with his associates. Men with thick watches and thicker smiles who shook her hand too long and looked at her like something on a menu. Nolan stepped closer. He smelled like bourbon and cold air. "Marcus called me today," he said. Serafina's chest tightened. Marcus was one of Nolan's business partners, a man with a red face and a nervous laugh who ran a logistics company downtown. She'd met him exactly twice. "He said you were friendly at the benefit last week." I said hello to him. "He said you smiled." I was being polite. Nolan's hand moved fast. "Not to hit. Not yet." He grabbed the back of her neck, fingers digging into the soft tissue below her skull, and pulled her face close. His breath was hot and sour. You don't smile at other men. I've told you this. I've told you this how many times? Nolan, please, how many times? A lot, she whispered. Then why do I keep having this conversation? He shoved her backward. She hit the nightstand, and the glass of water fell, shattering on the hardwood. She felt a shard bite into her heel, but didn't look down. Looking down was a mistake. Taking your eyes off Nolan when he was like this was a mistake. Everything was a mistake when the world was built on someone else's rules, and the rules changed every time you learned them. He stared at her. She stared back. And for a second, just 1 second, she felt something shift inside her chest. Not fear. Something colder. Something that tasted like the end of something. Clean that up, Nolan said, then walked out. Serafina stood there, blood pooling under her right foot, rain pounding the glass, the muted comedian laughing at nothing on the television screen. She bent down, picked up the largest shard of glass, and looked at it for a long time. Then she dropped it. She limped into the bathroom, locked the door, sat on the edge of the tub, and pressed a towel against her heel. The cut wasn't deep, but it bled like it meant something. Her hands shook, her jaw ached from clenching. She could hear Nolan in the kitchen, opening another bottle. The sound of the cap hitting the counter like a small, certain gunshot. 6 years. She was 20 when she met him. He was 31, successful, generous in that specific way that makes you feel rescued before you realize you're being bought. The first hit came 8 months in. An open palm across her cheek in a hotel bathroom in Milwaukee because she'd laughed too loud at dinner. He cried after. Said he'd never done anything like that before. Said she brought out something in him he couldn't control. She believed him because she needed to believe him, because the alternative, that she'd handed her life to a monster, was too heavy to carry at 20 years old. Now she was 26, and the weight was crushing her. She pulled out her phone. It was old. A backup she kept hidden inside a tampon box under the bathroom sink, the one piece of technology Nolan didn't know about. She'd bought it with cash from a corner store on the south side 2 years ago, during one of the rare afternoons he let her go to the salon alone. The phone had 7 contacts. Her mother, who lived in a nursing home in Rockford and barely remembered her name. A domestic violence hotline she'd called once and hung up. A burner number for a woman named Rita who used to cut her hair and once whispered, "If you ever need to disappear, I know people." And buried at the bottom, a name she hadn't looked at in years, Lucien Moretti. She'd met him once. Just once. 3 years ago, at a private fundraiser for a children's hospital. One of those events where legitimate money and dirty money share the same champagne and nobody asks questions. Nolan had stepped away to take a call, and Serafina found herself standing alone near the bar, holding a drink she wasn't allowed to finish. A man appeared beside her. Dark suit, dark hair pushed back, a face that looked like it had been carved from something harder than bone. He didn't smile. He didn't try to charm her. He just stood there, ordered a bourbon, and said, without looking at her, "The bruise under your left eye. Foundation doesn't cover it as well as you think." She nearly choked. Nobody had ever said anything, not one person in 3 years. "I don't know what you're talking about," she managed. He glanced at her then. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and they held nothing soft. No pity, no warmth, just a flat, unflinching recognition of exactly what he was looking at. "You will," he said. Then he placed a business card on the bar, plain white, no name, just a phone number, and walked away. She'd kept the card, transferred the number to her hidden phone. Never called it. Never planned to. The number existed in the same category as the fire escape and the kitchen knife, things she knew were there in case everything went sideways. Insurance against the unthinkable. Now, sitting on the edge of that bathtub at 1:04 a.m. with blood on the towel and the sound of Nolan's footsteps getting louder in the hallway, the unthinkable had arrived. He was at the bathroom door. "Open this door." She didn't move. "Serafina, open the door right now." His fist hit the wood. Once. Twice. The lock shuddered. She looked at the phone, looked at the number. Her thumb hovered over it the way a person's hand hovers over a fire alarm, knowing that pulling it will change everything, that the sirens will come, and nothing will be the same after, and there is no undoing the sound once it's made. "I will break this door down." She pressed call. It rang twice. A voice answered, low, controlled. The kind of voice that doesn't rise because it doesn't need to. "Yes." She opened her mouth, but what came out wasn't words. It was a sound, broken and wet and raw. The kind of sound that lives in the basement of a person's chest for years and only comes out when every wall finally cracks at once. "Who is this?" The voice didn't soften, but it slowed, like a predator recognizing wounded prey. "Who hurt you?" "It's—" She swallowed, tasted salt and copper. "It's Serafina, from the hospital benefit, 3 years ago. You gave me your number." Silence. Behind her the door cracked. The frame splintered near the top hinge. "He's going to break in," she whispered. Can you come get me?" More silence. Long enough that she thought he'd hung up. Long enough that the hope she'd assembled in the last 30 seconds started to collapse like wet paper. Then Lucien Moretti spoke. "Tell me the address." She told him. "Stay in the bathroom. Push anything heavy against the door. I'll be there in 12 minutes. The line went dead. 12 minutes. She didn't know if she had 12 minutes. She shoved the bathroom vanity stool against the door, wedged herself between the tub and the toilet, and pressed the towel harder against her foot. The rain hit the small bathroom window like gravel. She counted seconds in her head, the way she used to count as a child during thunderstorms, telling herself that each number brought her closer to the end of something. At the 9-minute mark, the door finally gave way. Nolan kicked through it with the flat of his foot, sending the stool skidding across the tile. He stood in the doorway, swaying, his eyes bloodshot, a vein pulsing in his temple. His fist was already balled. "Who did you call?" She said nothing. "I heard you talking. Who did you call?" "The police." It was a lie. A desperate, clumsy lie. But it landed. Something flickered in Nolan's eyes. Not fear exactly, but calculation. He grabbed her arm and yanked her to her feet. "You're lying," he said. "But it doesn't matter. We're leaving. Pack a bag." "I'm not going anywhere with you." The backhand came fast. She saw his shoulder turn and tried to pull back, but his other hand was still gripping her arm, and the blow caught her across the mouth. Her lips split open against her teeth. Blood ran down her chin and dropped onto the white marble. He dragged her into the hallway. She dug her heels in, the cut on her foot screaming, leaving a thin red smear on the hardwood. Nolan cursed and tightened his grip. Then the front door opened. It didn't bang. It didn't crash. It just opened, smoothly, quietly. The way things open when the person on the other side doesn't need to announce themselves because their presence does the work. Lucien Moretti stood in the doorway. Behind him, 2 men in dark clothing held the door. Beyond them, the hallway was empty. No neighbors. No noise. Just the hum of the building's ventilation system and the distant sound of rain. Lucien wore a charcoal overcoat, dark with water. His hair was wet. His face was completely still. Not angry, not cold, just absent of anything unnecessary. Every expression had been removed except the one that mattered, and the one that mattered said, "Someone in this room is going to bleed tonight, and I've already decided who." Nolan let go of Serafina's arm. "Who the hell are you?" Lucien stepped into the apartment. He didn't rush. He moved the way weather moves, slow, inevitable, indifferent to whatever's in its path. His eyes swept the room, the broken glass on the bedroom floor, the blood on the hallway hardwood, Serafina's swelling lip, the tears tracking through smeared makeup, the way she held her arm where Nolan's fingers had left marks that would bruise purple by morning. Lucien looked at all of it. Then he looked at Nolan. "You know who I am," Lucien said. It wasn't a question, and from the way Nolan's face changed, the blood draining from his cheeks, the slight backward shift of his weight, he did. Everybody in Nolan's world knew. You didn't move money through Chicago's underside without knowing the name Lucien Moretti the way you know the name of the building you work in. It's just there. It's always been there. And you don't touch it. "Listen," Nolan started. His voice cracked. The bravado was collapsing in real time, like watching a building lose its foundation floor by floor. "This is a private matter, between me and her. Whatever she told you—" Lucien hit him. One punch. A short, compact right hand that started from the hip and connected with the bridge of Nolan's nose. The sound was wet and final, cartilage giving way, the kind of sound you hear once and never forget. Nolan went backward, his feet tangling, and he crashed through the glass coffee table in the living room, sending shards across the carpet like scattered ice. Nolan lay in the wreckage, blood pouring from his nose, his hands raised. Not to fight, to beg. Lucien stood over him. He didn't hit him again. He didn't need to. The first punch had communicated everything. The second would have been excessive, and Lucien Moretti was not an excessive man. He was precise. Every action calibrated, every consequence pre-measured. "If I see you again," Lucien said, his voice never rising above conversational, "if I hear your name in any room she's ever been in, I will take you apart. Not quickly, not all at once. I'll do it the way I do everything, carefully." Nolan didn't respond. He lay in the broken glass, whimpering, one hand pressed to his ruined nose, the other flat on the carpet like he was trying to hold on to the ground. Lucien turned to Serafina. For a moment, something shifted in his face. A crack in the stone, not warmth, not exactly, but something adjacent to it, something that recognized her not as a problem to solve, but as a person standing at the edge of something she couldn't come back from. He removed his overcoat and placed it around her shoulders. It was heavy and damp, and smelled like rain and something darker underneath. Leather, maybe, or smoke, or the particular scent that clings to a man who has spent his life walking through rooms where violence is always possible. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded. "Then walk with me." They moved toward the door. Behind them, Lucien's men entered the apartment. Two professionals who stepped around the blood and glass with practiced indifference, their faces blank, their movements efficient. What they did with Nolan after that, Serafina didn't see. She didn't look back. She had spent 6 years looking back, at promises, at apologies, at the version of herself that existed before the first hit, and none of it had ever saved her. The elevator ride down was silent. Lucien stood beside her, not touching, not speaking, his hands clasped in front of him. In the harsh fluorescent light, she could see the details she'd missed at the fundraiser. A thin scar that ran along his left jawline, a slight asymmetry to his nose that suggested it had been broken more than once, the way his knuckles were already swelling from the punch. His eyes, up close, were not black. They were a very dark brown with flecks of amber near the center, and they held the particular kind of tiredness that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from knowing too much about the way the world actually works. They stepped out into the rain. The SUVs were parked at the curb, engines running. A man with a shaved head opened the rear door. Lucien gestured for Serafina to get in first, then followed. The door closed. The city disappeared behind tinted glass. "Where are we going?" she asked. Her voice sounded strange to her, thin, like it belonged to someone younger. "Somewhere safe." "How do you know it's safe?" He looked at her. "Because I'm the one who decides what's safe." It wasn't arrogance, or maybe it was, but it was also true, and she was too tired and too broken to argue with the truth. The SUV moved north along the lake. Rain streaked the windows, the city lights bleeding into long vertical smears of gold and white. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and closed her eyes, and felt, for the first time in 6 years, the strange and terrifying sensation of not knowing what was going to happen next, which she realized was different from fear. Fear was knowing exactly what was coming. This was something else. This was the void after the certainty collapses. They drove for 40 minutes. The city thinned. The buildings dropped away. Suburbs bled into stretches of dark trees and empty road. And then the road curved along the lakeshore, and then a gate appeared. Iron, 12 feet high, flanked by stone pillars. And the SUV slowed, and a guard in black waved them through, and the gate closed behind them with a mechanical groan that sounded like the door of a vault sealing shut. The Moretti estate sat on 7 acres of lakefront property. A 3-story stone mansion surrounded by old oaks, its windows glowing amber in the rain. It looked like something from a different century, a fortress dressed up as a home, with security cameras nested in the eaves like mechanical birds, and motion sensors buried in the manicured lawn. The driveway was circular, paved in dark brick. 3 more SUVs were parked near the garage. Men in dark clothing moved along the perimeter, their silhouettes cutting through the rain like slow-moving shadows. Inside, the house was warm, hardwood floors the color of dark honey, tall ceilings, the smell of coffee and old wood. A woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes met them in the foyer. Lucienne called her Elena, and without a word she took Serafina's arm and led her upstairs to a bedroom with clean sheets, a private bathroom, and a window facing the lake. "There are clothes in the closet," Elena said. "Towels in the cabinet. If you need anything, press the intercom by the door." Serafina stood in the middle of the room, still wearing Lucien's coat, blood drying on her chin, glass dust in her hair. She didn't move. She didn't sit down. She just stood there, staring at the bed like she'd forgotten what beds were for. Elena paused at the door. "He won't come up," she said. "Not unless you ask. You're safe here." The word landed like a stone in deep water. Safe. She turned it over in her mind, trying to find a meaning she could trust. She'd heard it before. From Nolan, from therapists she saw twice before Nolan canceled the appointments, from friends who eventually stopped calling because Nolan made sure they did. Safe was a word other people used, a word for lives built on different foundations. She sat on the edge of the bed. The coat fell off one shoulder. She looked at the lake through the window, black and endless, the rain dimpling its surface in the security lights. And she cried. Not the way she'd cried in the bathroom, broken and desperate. This was different, slower, heavier. The kind of crying that doesn't come from pain, but from the sudden unbearable release of pretending you weren't in pain at all. Downstairs, Lucien stood in his study, his back to the door, staring at the same lake through a different window. His right hand was wrapped in a bag of ice. His phone was on the desk, and on the screen was a photograph. A girl, maybe 17, with dark hair and Lucien's eyes, laughing at something outside the frame. The photo was old. The edges were worn. He picked up the phone, made a call. "I need everything on Nolan Graves. Business partners, financials, travel, everyone he's talked to in the last 12 months. A pause. "And find me the connection to Vescari. I know it's there. Dig until you hit it." He hung up. Then he looked at the photograph one more time, his jaw tightening, and put the phone face down on the desk. By morning, Nolan Graves had disappeared from Chicago. Not dead? Lucien didn't waste death on men like Nolan. Disappeared, relocated, removed from the equation the way you remove a piece from a chessboard, not because it's dangerous, but because it's in the way. But Nolan's absence created a vacuum, and in Lucien's world, vacuums were more dangerous than the things that filled them. 3 days after Serafina arrived at the estate, Lucien received a phone call that changed everything. His intelligence network, a web of informants, compromised officials, and surveillance assets that stretched across the Midwest, had uncovered something in Nolan Graves' financial records, something Nolan probably didn't even understand. Shell companies, layered wire transfers, money moving through a series of fronts that all traced back to a single point. Damien Vescari. The name alone was enough to change the temperature of any room in Chicago's underworld. Vescari ran the largest trafficking operation between Detroit and St. Louis, a brutally efficient machine that moved people, mostly women, mostly young, mostly from situations desperate enough that disappearance was easy. Through a network of safe houses, forged documents, and corrupted border contacts. He was smart, patient, and completely without the restraints that even most criminals pretended to have. And Nolan Graves had been laundering his money, which meant Serafina, who had lived in Nolan's apartment for 6 years, who had seen files and numbers and names that Nolan left carelessly on his desk because he never considered her a person capable of understanding or remembering or threatening, had been living inside Vescari's operation without knowing it. She was a witness, and Damien Vescari did not leave witnesses alive. Lucien sat in his study, the files spread across his desk, the pieces clicking into place with the sickening precision of a trap he should have seen sooner. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. "Pull the security detail tighter," he said. "Double the perimeter rotation. Nobody in or out without my clearance." A pause. "Because she's not just a woman I pulled out of a bad situation. She's a target. And Vescari is going to come looking." He hung up, leaned back in his chair, and stared at the ceiling. The house was quiet. Upstairs, Serafina was sleeping for the first time in days. Elena had told him, quietly, that the girl had finally closed her eyes around 4 in the morning, still curled in his coat. Lucien closed his own eyes. He thought about his sister. He thought about the photograph on his phone. He thought about the girl sleeping upstairs who had called a number she kept hidden in a tampon box because the world had given her nowhere else to go. And he thought about Damien Vescari, somewhere out in the dark, already calculating, already moving, already sharpening the knife. The war Lucien had been building toward for years. The slow, patient, piece by piece dismantling of Vescari's empire had just accelerated. Because now there was something new at stake, something he hadn't planned for, something he couldn't afford to lose. And somewhere across the city, in a penthouse that smelled like cigar smoke and expensive silence, Damien Vescari picked up his own phone, listened to a report about a missing money launderer named Nolan Graves, and smiled. "Find out who took him," Vescari said, "and find the girl. She's seen the books." He hung up, swirled his glass, and looked out at the same rain falling on the same city. "Moretti?" he whispered to himself, tasting the name like something he intended to swallow whole. The hunt had begun. The morning after Serafina arrived at the Moretti estate, the rain stopped. It stopped the way bad weather always stops in Chicago. Not gradually, not gently, but all at once, like someone upstairs got tired of the noise and pulled a switch. The clouds broke around 6:30, and pale winter light pushed through the gaps and fell across the lake in long, flat sheets, turning the water from black to dark green to something almost gray-blue, depending on which angle you caught it from. Serafina caught it from the window of the guest bedroom, sitting cross-legged on the window seat with a mug of coffee Elena had left outside the door. Knocked once, set it down, walked away, no expectation of conversation, and she watched the light change on the water for 40 minutes without moving. She was trying to figure out what she felt. That was the problem with surviving something. People assumed you felt relief, gratitude, some clean, bright emotion that made the suffering make sense. But surviving wasn't clean. Surviving felt like standing in a room after a fire. Everything's still there, just charred, just wrong-shaped. The wall's still up, but the inside's gutted, and you're not sure if the structure is sound or if it's going to come down the moment you put any weight on it. She felt charred. Her lip had swollen overnight, a fat ridge along the left side that split open again when she tried to drink the coffee too fast. The cut on her heel had been cleaned and wrapped. Elena again, wordless and efficient, arriving with a first aid kit at some point in the night, but it pulled with every step. Her arm, where Nolan had grabbed her, wore a bruise that had deepened to the color of an old plum. She pressed 2 fingers against the bruise and held the pressure there. Not masochistically, just to feel something real. Something she could measure. There was a knock at the door. Not Elena's knock. 2 quiet, professional raps. This one was different. 1 knock, flat, like a statement. "Come in," she said. Lucien opened the door and stood in the frame. He was dressed, dark trousers, a gray shirt rolled to the forearms, no tie. And he looked like a man who had not slept but had decided sleep was irrelevant. His right hand was still wrapped at the knuckles with white medical tape. He held a folder at his side. He looked at her for a moment, then at the bruise on her arm. His jaw moved slightly, the way a jaw moves when you're grinding your back teeth and trying not to show it. "Can I come in? It's your house." "That's not what I asked." She looked at him. "Yes, come in." He entered, but he didn't sit. He stood near the center of the room, away from her, like he'd calculated the distance that made conversation possible without it becoming something else. He set the folder on the foot of the bed. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen before you say anything." Serafina set down the coffee. "Okay, Nolan Graves wasn't just an abusive boyfriend. He was running a financial pipeline for a man named Damien Vescari." He watched her face. "Does that name mean anything to you?" She thought. Turned the name over. "No. That's probably lucky." He pulled a photograph from the folder and held it out. A man in his 50s. Heavy build, silver hair, the face of someone who'd learned that expressions were strategic. His organization moves people, women mostly, runs them through a network that spans 5 states. Nolan was cleaning his money through a series of fronts, 2 of which you lived above for the last 3 years. The words landed one at a time like slow-falling objects. She didn't reach for the photo. She kept her eyes on Lucien's face. "You're saying I was living inside it?" You were adjacent to it, which from Viscari's perspective is the same thing. I didn't know. I know you didn't. I saw files sometimes. On Nolan's desk, numbers, company names. I never... She stopped. Her stomach was doing something unpleasant. I never thought it was worth understanding. It wasn't your job to understand it. It was his job to make sure you didn't. Lucien put the photo back. The problem is that Viscari doesn't know what you understood and what you didn't. All he knows is that a woman who lived with his accountant for 6 years is now missing, and the accountant is gone, and neither of you can be explained. So he's looking for me. He started looking approximately 18 hours ago. The room was very quiet. Outside, a bird landed on the window ledge, looked in, and left. "What does that mean for me?" she asked. Her voice was steady. She'd learned early to keep her voice steady when the world was falling. "It means you stay here, inside the perimeter, until I handle it." Handle it how? Something shifted in his expression, not evasion, more like the closing of a door. "That's not your concern." Serafina stood up. The movement was deliberate. She walked to the foot of the bed and picked up the folder herself, opened it, and looked at the contents. More photographs, wire transfer records, names of companies she didn't recognize, a map of the Midwest with red lines connecting cities, and in the bottom corner, a series of photographs of women, young, mostly, with dates and reference numbers below each one. Her hands tightened on the folder. "How long have you known about this?" she asked. "The full scope of it? 2 days?" "No, Viscari." "How long have you known about Viscari?" The pause was small, but she caught it. 3 years, Lucien said. She looked up. 3 years? Yes. That fundraiser, when you gave me your number. Yes. You already knew who Nolan was. Lucien didn't look away. I knew he was connected. I didn't know the extent, and I didn't know about you until I saw you standing alone at that bar with a bruise you were trying to hide. But you knew enough to give me your number. I gave you an exit because you looked like someone who was going to need one. And because I was useful. The word landed hard. He let it. He didn't flinch from it. That's not why I gave you the number. But it's why you're explaining all this to me now. I'm explaining it because you deserve to know the truth. Or because you need something from me. Information. Something I saw on Nolan's desk. Something in my head that I don't even know is there. He was quiet for a beat too long. "Which is it?" she asked. "Both things can be true at the same time," he said. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a justification. It was just the flat, unvarnished thing, offered straight, and she respected it even though she hated it. She closed the folder and set it back on the bed. "What do you need me to remember?" she asked. The question seemed to cost him something. A small muscle in his jaw moved. "Not yet," he said. "You've been here less than 24 hours. Give yourself a day." "I've been giving myself days for 6 years. She met his eyes. "Ask me." He studied her face for a long moment. Then he pulled a chair from the corner of the room, turned it around, and sat on it backwards, arms folded across the top. Not the posture of a man used to asking, more the posture of a man who had decided to try. "The company names on those transfer sheets," he said. "Pinnacle Meridian Group, Coastal Systems Limited, Northbridge Financial." Did Nolan ever mention those names out loud? In phone calls? In conversation? She thought. She was good at remembering. Nolan had always underestimated her memory because he underestimated her entirely, and that was the one advantage 6 years of captivity had given her. She'd cataloged everything because having information was the only kind of power available to her. "Northbridge," she said. He said it once on the phone. I was in the next room. He said, "Tell them Northbridge clears on Thursday, not Friday, and if Damien has a problem with that, he can call me himself." Lucien was very still. "You remember the exact words." "I remember everything. I had a lot of time to collect things." He reached into the back of the folder and pulled out a fresh sheet. A pen appeared from his shirt pocket. He set both on the bed in front of her without pushing them at her. "Write down anything else like that. Names, numbers you heard, dates, anything that felt like it didn't belong to Nolan's regular life." She picked up the pen. What she wrote over the next 40 minutes filled both sides of the page. The days that followed had a rhythm that was uncomfortable in its almost normalcy. Serafina woke at 6. Coffee appeared outside the door at 6:15. She walked the interior of the house, not the grounds, not yet, not until Lucien's security rotation was reconfigured, and mapped the space the way she'd mapped every space she'd ever occupied. Exits, angles of visibility, the location of every person and their pattern of movement. Old habit. The kind of habit you develop when your home is a place where danger lives with you. The estate had 8 full-time security personnel on the grounds, rotating in 3 shifts. 2 stationed at the main gate, 2 on the perimeter, 1 in the surveillance room on the ground floor monitoring 8 camera feeds, and 2 who moved, circulating, unpredictable, responding to variation. Lucien had designed the system himself, according to Elena, who said it with the particular tone of a woman both impressed by and exhausted by the person she described. Elena herself was harder to place. She cooked, she managed the household, she appeared at the right moments and disappeared from the wrong ones with an efficiency that suggested either exceptional intuition or a very long history with the man she worked for. She spoke to Serafina in short, practical sentences. She never asked questions. On the 3rd morning, she left a change of clothes outside Serafina's door. Nothing dramatic, just jeans, a sweater, socks, a pair of boots that fit like they'd been bought specifically for her feet. No explanation. Serafina wore them. On the 4th day, she came downstairs and found Lucien in the kitchen. He was standing at the counter with a mug in one hand and a phone to his ear, and he was speaking in a low, hard voice that he cut off the moment she appeared. He said something brief into the phone and hung up. Then he poured a second mug of coffee and set it on the counter without looking at her. "You sleep?" he asked. "Some? Eat something." He slid a plate toward her. Eggs, toast, the kind of meal that communicated function over comfort. She sat on the stool and ate while he stood across the counter and read something on his phone, and they stayed like that, not talking, for almost 10 minutes, and it was the least tense 10 minutes she'd experienced in a long time. Then he said, "I need to show you something tonight, downstairs." She looked up. "Downstairs where?" "There's a level below the basement, a working room." He put the phone down. "You should see what we have, what we've built, before I ask you to trust the next part of this." "Before you ask me to trust it," she repeated. "That's an interesting way to phrase it. I'm not going to pretend you're not involved. That would insult you." He picked up the phone again. 8 o'clock. Elena will bring you down." He left the kitchen. She heard his footsteps cross the foyer and disappear into the study, and the door closed with a sound like finality. She looked at the eggs, ate them. That evening, while the last winter light was dying over the lake, Serafina was in the east corridor on the 2nd floor when she heard voices rising from behind the study door. She wasn't eavesdropping, or she was, but only because the anger in one of the voices was loud enough to stop her mid-step, the way a gunshot stops everything in earshot. "You brought her here." The voice was male, accented, not Lucian's, rough around the consonants, like the words had been formed in another language first. "You pulled her out of a situation that should have been handled quietly, and you brought her into this house." Lucien's response was lower, controlled. She couldn't catch the words. She stepped closer to the door. "She's a liability. You know what Viscari does when he wants information and can't find it? He makes noise. He burns things down. You've given him a reason to burn this." "I've given him a reason to step out of the dark," Lucian said, and this time she heard him clearly, his voice cutting through the door like it was paper. "That's what I've been trying to do for 3 years, Nico." "Not like this." "It's exactly like this. She has details in her head she didn't even know she was carrying. She lived inside his pipeline. She can hand me Vescari's structure in ways my people haven't been able to reach. And when he sends men here, when he figures out where she is, he already knows where she is." Silence. "That's the point," Lucian said. "I want him to come to me." More silence. Then the other voice, lower, tighter, barely controlled. "You're using her as bait." "I'm using the situation." "That's the same thing." "It's not." "She doesn't know that's what this is." A long pause. Serafina pressed her back flat against the wall, her heart moving too fast, her breathing too shallow. She forced herself to slow it down, to think, to catalog what she was hearing the way she cataloged everything. "She knows enough," Lucian said, "and she's tougher than she looks. That's not the question. The question is whether she agreed to be your trap. The question," Lucian said, "is whether you trust me to handle this." "I've trusted you for 15 years. That's not the issue." A pause. Tell her. Everything. Tonight. Or I walk, and I take the Eastern Network with me. The sound of a chair scraping, heavy footsteps moving toward the door. Serafina moved. Down the hall, around the corner, into a doorway. She pressed herself into the shadow and held her breath while the study door opened and a man walked out. Broad-shouldered, mid-50s, thick gray at the temples, a scar running diagonally through his left eyebrow. He walked past without looking in her direction, his footsteps deliberate and angry, and disappeared down the stairs. She stood in the doorway for a long time. Then she straightened, walked back to her room, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the floor. She thought about the number on the card, about the 12 minutes, about the coat placed around her shoulders, and the eggs on the counter this morning, and the boots that fit like they'd been bought for her feet. She thought about the word bait, and she decided that if Lucien Moretti had intended to use her, she was going to make damn sure he had to look her in the eye when he did it. 8 o'clock. Elena appeared at the door and led her through the main floor, past the kitchen, through a door that opened onto a narrow staircase she hadn't seen before. 2 flights down. The air changed. Cooler, drier, the smell of concrete and electronics. She heard the low hum of servers before she saw them. The room at the bottom was large, larger than the rooms above it. The ceiling was low and industrial. Along every wall, photographs, printed documents, maps with pins and string, surveillance images, financial charts, banks of computer monitors showing live feeds, streets, parking structures, what looked like the lobby of a downtown hotel. In the center of the room, a long table covered in files and coffee cups, and at least 3 laptops. Lucien stood at the far end, waiting. He looked at her and something passed over his face, quick, gone almost before it arrived, that she read as the expression of a man who has prepared for a conversation he knows is going to cost him. "You heard us," he said. It wasn't a question. "I heard enough." "How much?" "Enough to know you want Viscari to find me here. Enough to know I wasn't just a rescue. I was an opportunity." She kept her voice flat, not accusing, just naming the facts. "Enough to know that you know more about why my life fell apart than you've told me." Lucien looked at the table for a moment. Then he pulled out a chair. Not for her. For himself. He sat down with the posture of a man who was going to stop managing the conversation and start being in it. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He reached into a file on the table and placed a photograph between them. Not a surveillance photo. A real one. Personal. Warm-lit. The kind taken at someone's birthday or graduation. A girl. 17. Maybe 18. Dark hair. His eyes exactly. "Her name was Mara," Lucien said. "My sister. 18 years old. She was taken 6 years ago from a bus station in Joliet. She was identified in Viscari's network 8 weeks later." He paused. "She didn't survive the extraction attempt." The room was very quiet. "That's why all of this." He gestured at the walls. "At the years of evidence pinned and mapped and cross-referenced. That's what this room is." Serafina looked at the photograph, at the girl who had Lucien's eyes and was smiling at something outside the frame, not knowing what was coming, the way people always smile in the photographs taken just before everything changes. 6 years ago, she said slowly. "Yes. I met Nolan 6 years ago." The air in the room tightened. "Yes," Lucien said. "He targeted me. We believe Viscari's organization uses relationships as pipeline access. They identify vulnerable women and place men close to them, men who isolate, control, position, so when the time comes, we disappear." The words came out of her in a voice that didn't sound like her own, too flat, too cold. "And it looks like a woman leaving a bad relationship, not a disappearance, just gone. That's the method." She was quiet for a long time. The hum of the servers filled the silence. One of the monitors showed a car moving slowly along a street she recognized, the block where Nolan's apartment building stood. "He was going to sell me," she said. "We believe you were being prepared for it. You were isolated, no friends, no family with resources, no record of violence because you never reported it. You fit the profile of someone who could vanish without generating investigation. How long? How long before the transfer? We think you were 8 to 12 weeks from being moved." She put her hands flat on the table. She stared at them, at the chipped nail polish. At the faded scar on her right knuckle from a kitchen accident 3 years ago that Nolan told her was her own clumsiness when she knew perfectly well he had pushed her. 8 weeks. She had been 8 weeks from disappearing completely into the thing that had taken Lucien's sister. "I would have been dead," she said. "Probably. Or worse." "Yes." She breathed, in, out, the way you breathe when you're deciding whether to fall apart or not. She made the decision, not yet, not here, not in front of him. "So what's the plan?" she asked. Something shifted in Lucien's face, a form of respect she hadn't seen before. Not the respect you give a victim, the respect you give someone who keeps standing up. "Viscari knows you're gone. He knows Nolan is gone. His people are looking. Within the next 72 hours, they'll locate you here, either through surveillance, through compromised sources in the city, or through a deliberate leak I'm considering making." "You're considering telling him where I am?" "It would accelerate the timeline and allow me to control the terrain." "Controlled terrain being your fortress with 20 armed guards." 8, he said, "but yes." "And me?" "You continue doing what you've been doing, writing down what you remember. We go through it systematically. Every piece of information you have from 6 years inside Nolan's life. It builds the case. Enough of it, and Viscari is finished. Not just here, not just in Chicago, federally, permanently. And if his people get here before the case is built, they won't. But if they do..." He looked at her, that flat, steady, exhausted look. "I don't lose things I decide to protect. Your sister." She stopped herself. He didn't flinch, but the muscle in his jaw moved. "I failed her," he said simply. "I was not paying attention, and I failed her, and she is dead, and I will carry that every day for the rest of my life." He didn't look away. "I am paying attention now." The silence after that was different, not empty, dense. Serafina looked at the photograph of Mara, at the walls of evidence, at Lucien sitting across from her with his wrapped knuckles and his exhausted eyes and his 15-year-old hatred for a man who was now coming for both of them. "I want to see all of it," she said. "Everything in this room, every file, every photograph. If you want what's in my head, I want to understand the whole picture first." Lucien studied her. "That could take all night," he said. "Then we start now." He reached across this table, pulled the largest file toward her, opened it, and the night began. They worked until 3 in the morning, side by side at the table, not touching, speaking only about the facts in front of them. Serafina read and Lucien explained, and she asked questions, sharp, specific questions that made him pause and reconsider his own conclusions twice. She had 6 years of accumulated observations stored in her memory like documents in an archive, and piece by piece she extracted them. A phone number she'd heard Nolan repeat, a date he'd been out of the city, a name scrawled on a notepad, a car she'd seen parked outside the building 3 times in 1 week. Each fragment landed in Lucien's evidence grid like a key turning in a lock. At one point, around midnight, she looked up from a financial chart and found him watching her. Not with anything she could have named easily. Something complicated. Something that a man like him probably hadn't practiced and didn't have the vocabulary for. She looked back at the chart. He looked back at his laptop. Neither of them said anything. Around 2:30, she found it. A name in a transfer record. Handwritten in the margin of a sheet she recognized. Not from Lucien's files, but from her own memory. Nolan had left it on the kitchen table once, 8 months ago, and she'd seen it while clearing the dishes. And the name had struck her as odd because it was a person's name written among company names. A single name. Calvert. She pushed the sheet across the table, tapped the margin. Lucien looked. His entire body went still. "You know this name?" she said. His voice, when it came, was barely above a murmur. "Calvert is Viscari's logistics director, the man who runs the actual movement of the network. We've been trying to identify him for 2 years. He looked up at her. "You remember seeing this?" "I remember everything." He stared at the name. "With this," he said slowly, "we can locate the transfer hub. Every woman currently in the pipeline. Every safe house, every border contact, every..." He stopped. Something crossed his face that she'd never seen there before. Something close to fragile. "We can shut it down, all of it." She watched him. Watched whatever it was he was holding back press against the back of his eyes. "Mara," she said quietly. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The moment lasted only a second. Then he closed it. The professional distance snapped back into place. He turned to his laptop and began typing rapidly. Then, at exactly 2:47 a.m., every screen in the room went white, then black. The server hum died. The monitors went to static. In the sudden silence, the intercom on the wall crackled. Then a voice, one of the exterior guards, tight with controlled urgency, spoke 3 words. "We have contact." Lucien was on his feet before the last word finished. The screens flickered back on. 1 camera feed, exterior, south perimeter, 5 figures moving through the tree line, low and practiced, weapons visible. A second feed, the main gate, a black SUV sitting 80 meters back, engine running, lights off. A third, east perimeter, 4 more figures. Lucien pulled a phone from his pocket and made a call in 3 seconds. "All positions. Stage 2. South perimeter is active." He turned to Serafina. His voice dropped to something direct and absolute. "There's a safe room on this level. Steel door. Code is 4791. You go now and you don't come out until I—" Then the first explosion hit. Not the house, outside near the east wing, but close enough to shake the foundation, close enough to send a crack spidering across the ceiling of the underground room, close enough to knock one of the monitors off the wall. Plaster dust fell in thin white curtains. Lucien moved. He was across the room in 3 steps, had a handgun from a locked drawer, and was at the base of the stairs in 4 more. He turned back once. Serafina was already standing. "Safe room," he said. "Now." What if they cut the power again? The room has independent power. What if they know about the room? His jaw tightened. "Go." She went. The stairs to the safe room branched left at the far end of the basement level. A narrow corridor she hadn't noticed during the tour, industrial lighting, the smell of concrete and sealed air. The door at the end was exactly as described. Steel, heavy, a keypad mounted at shoulder height. She punched in the code. 4791. The lock released. She pushed the door open, stepped inside, turned to pull it shut, and stopped. Because in the corridor behind her, moving fast from the direction of the staircase, was a figure she didn't recognize. Not one of Lucien's guards. Wrong clothes, wrong movement. The particular low crouch of someone who had been trained to cross a room quickly and quietly. He hadn't seen her yet. His attention was on the door she was holding open. The safe room door. He was moving toward the safe room. They knew about the room. She had 4 seconds to make a decision. Lock herself inside with him, or... She let the door fall shut, heard the lock re-engage, turned around, ran, back down the corridor the wrong direction, away from the safe room, away from the locked door between her and the enemy, toward the staircase that led back up into the house where the gunshots had started, where the smoke was beginning to curl under the doorways, where Lucien was somewhere in the dark doing what he'd spent 3 years building toward. She ran straight into it. There was no other direction. The smoke hit her before the heat did. It rolled down the stairwell in thick gray curtains, the kind of smoke that doesn't come from wood or paper, but from something chemical. Insulation, wiring, synthetic material burning at a temperature it wasn't designed for. It tasted like the back of a throat after a fever. She pulled the collar of her sweater up over her nose and took the stairs 2 at a time, her wrapped heels screaming with every impact, the cut reopening inside the bandage, warmth spreading across the sole of her foot. Behind her, she heard the safe room corridor go quiet. The figure she'd seen hadn't followed her, which meant one of 2 things. He'd found another way in, or he'd already accomplished what he came to do. Neither option was good. The first floor was chaos measured in degrees. The east wing was the worst. She could see orange light pulsing under the door at the far end of the main corridor, the interior glow of something burning steadily behind the wall. The foyer was intact but thick with haze. 2 of Lucien's guards moved through it in the direction of the east wing, weapons up, communicating in shorthand signals. One of them saw her and stopped. "Get back downstairs," he said. "Someone's in the basement." He was heading for the safe room. The guard's expression shifted. He keyed his earpiece, spoke fast, listened. His eyes came back to her. "How many?" "1." I saw one. He said something else into the earpiece, too low for her to catch, then pointed at the kitchen doorway. Through there. There's a service corridor on the left. Follow it to the garage. Stay in the garage until someone comes for you. Where's Lucien? Outside, south perimeter. Go! She went. The kitchen was dark except for the emergency lighting, strips of dim red along the baseboards, enough to see shapes, not enough to see details. She found the service corridor, a narrow passage that smelled like cleaning supplies and motor oil, and moved through it fast, one hand trailing the wall, the other holding her sweater over her face. The garage was large, cold, smelled like rubber and exhaust. 3 vehicles. 2 SUVs and a dark blue sedan. The overhead door was closed, one strip of emergency lighting. She pressed herself against the wall beside the door and listened. Outside, gunfire. Sporadic but present. Not the rapid chaos of a firefight, but the particular rhythm of controlled exchanges, professionals taking positions, measuring angles, not wasting ammunition. She'd never been around gunfire before 3 days ago, and she understood it now the way you understand a language you've heard spoken but never studied, imperfectly, but well enough to survive. Then the side door of the garage opened. She pressed back, held herself flat. Her breath stopped. A man entered. He was wearing dark tactical clothing, not Lucien's guard uniform. Different cut, different boots. He had a weapon held low at his side and a device in his other hand, small and rectangular, that he was pointing at the vehicles. Looking for something, scanning. He hadn't seen her yet. The space between them was 12 feet, maybe less. She looked at the tools hung on the wall beside her, a row of them. Wrenches, a pry bar, zip ties, a rubber mallet. Her eyes moved to the pry bar. Heavy, 3 feet of solid steel. She'd never hit anyone in her life. She'd spent 6 years absorbing violence, not delivering it, and her body had learned that particular physics deeply. But 6 years absorbing violence teaches you where it hurts. She took the pry bar off the wall. The movement made a sound, shout. Metal scraping metal, barely audible, but audible. The man turned. She swung, not at his head. She aimed lower, his weapon arm, the elbow, the joint. The bar connected with a dull, meaty impact, and he made a sound that wasn't a word, just the involuntary response of a nervous system registering pain, and the weapon dropped and skittered across the concrete. He grabbed his arm. She swung again. Not the elbow this time, she wasn't thinking, just moving, and caught him across the side of the jaw. He went down. She stood over him, breathing hard, the pry bar still in her hands, her palms burning, her vision slightly blurred at the edges from adrenaline. He was unconscious, not dead. She could see his chest rising. She picked up his weapon. She didn't know the specific model. She knew how to hold it from watching Lucien's guards. She knew the safety was likely on, and she knew which direction to point it. She kept it. The garage side door opened again. She raised the weapon. Lucien stepped in. He was bleeding from a cut above his left eye, a thin red line that had tracked down his temple and dried along his jaw. His shirt was torn at the shoulder. He had a gun in each hand. His eyes swept the room. The unconscious man, the pry bar on the ground, Serafina holding the weapon she'd taken, and something moved across his face that she didn't have time to decode. "Good," he said. Just that. Then, "We need to move. Now." "What's happening outside?" "They hit the south and east simultaneously. We've contained the south. East is still active." He stepped over the unconscious man without looking at him. "There's a vehicle in the back of the property, off-grid. We're taking it." "Your guards?" "My guards can handle the rest. I need you somewhere Vescari's people can't reach, and this location is compromised." "You said they'd come to you. You said you controlled the terrain." He looked at her. His jaw was tight. "I miscalculated the timeline." It was an admission that clearly cost him. She read it in the way he moved, faster than usual, with a quality of controlled anger underneath the efficiency, the anger of a precise man confronting the evidence of his own imprecision. "There's a vehicle outside," she said. One of them was scanning the garage with something, looking for a signal or a transponder maybe. Lucien stopped, turned, looked at the device she'd left on the floor near the unconscious man. He crouched, picked it up, examined it for 2 seconds. His entire expression changed. "That's not a transponder scanner," he said. "What is it?" "It's a signal broadcaster." He turned it over in his hands. It's been transmitting our location for... He checked the device. His jaw tightened further. 40 minutes. They knew where we were. They knew exactly where we were. His voice had gone very quiet. The dangerous kind of quiet. Before they hit the perimeter. Before the attack started. Someone inside this estate gave them our position with enough lead time to deploy and stage. The words settled between them like a stone dropped into still water. Someone inside. Serafina thought of the study door. The voice behind it. I've trusted you for 15 years. The man with the scar through his eyebrow walking past her in the corridor, his footsteps angry and deliberate. Nico, she said. Lucian's head came up. The man from the study, she said. The argument I heard. He threatened to take his network and leave if you didn't tell me everything. Nico wouldn't... He stopped. She watched him stop. Watched him work through whatever certainty he'd carried for 15 years and measure it against the device in his hand and the 40 minutes of transmission and the hit squad that arrived exactly when it needed to. He knew about the safe room, she said. One of them went straight for it. He knew the layout. Lucien set the device down on the hood of the nearest SUV. He stared at it. His hands were completely still. That was the worst part. A man who never went still had gone still, and it meant that whatever was happening inside him was so large that even his body had stopped to accommodate it. 15 years, he said. Not to her, to himself. Or to the absence of something he'd believed in for 15 years. She didn't say anything. He put the device in his pocket, picked up the extra weapon from the floor. And when he turned back to her, the thing that had briefly surfaced in his face, the cracked open thing, the 15 years, was gone. Sealed. A vault locked from the inside. Follow me, he said. They moved through this back of the garage into a utility passage that ran along the exterior of the property's eastern fence. The air was cold and raw, smelling of burning and wet grass. Above the tree line, a column of smoke rose pale against the dark sky. The east wing, still burning. She could hear the guards' voices in the distance, short bursts of radio communication, and beneath it all the sound of sirens growing somewhere in the middle distance. Chicago's fire departments were not subtle. They reached a section of fencing she hadn't seen before. A gap, barely wide enough for one person, concealed behind a utility box. Through it, a narrow path through trees. Lucian went through first, then held the gap for her. She ducked through. The branches caught at her hair. The ground was soft and gave under her feet, cold mud and wet leaves. The vehicle was exactly where he'd said it would be. A gray pickup truck, 10 years old, nothing distinctive about it, parked on a service road that ran behind the estate's tree line. No estate branding, no transponder, keys above the visor. She knew without asking that Lucian had planted it here specifically for a scenario where everything went wrong. She got in the passenger side. He got behind the wheel. The engine turned over on the first attempt, and he pulled onto the service road with the lights off, navigating by the ambient glow of the sky. City light reflected back from the cloud base, turning the horizon a dull amber. They drove for 4 minutes in silence. Then Serafina said, "Where are we going?" "Safe house, south side. Nobody knows about it except me and Elena." "Can you trust Elena?" "Yes." "How do you know?" He glanced at her. "Because she has no connection to Nico. She predates him, and because she's been protecting this family since before I was old enough to understand what that meant." She accepted this. She was learning, faster than she wanted to, how to read which of Lucien's certainties were operational and which were personal. Elena was personal, deep and old, and not up for discussion. "Tell me about Nico," she said. His hands on the wheel were steady. His voice, when it came, was flat. "Nico Carrera. We grew up 4 blocks from each other on the west side. His father worked for mine. When my father died, Nico stayed. When I built the network, Nico built the eastern side of it. Informants, political contacts, logistics across Indiana and Ohio." A pause. "He was with me the night we lost Mara. He was the one who found the intelligence that pointed to Vescari 6 months later." "He pointed you at Vescari." A silence. "He pointed me at Vescari," Lucien said. Something in his voice on that sentence, a new weight. She watched him turn it over in real time, this man who had trained himself not to think out loud, reconsidering the architecture of the last 3 years with a single shifted variable. What if he always knew, she said carefully, what Viscari was doing, and pointed you at him not to help you destroy him, but to manage you? Keep you aimed at something real enough to satisfy, but never close enough to land. Lucien's jaw moved. What if Mara wasn't the beginning, she continued. What if she was the leverage? What if Nico had a relationship with Viscari that predated her death, and her death was— Don't! The word came out hard, not angry at her, protective of something he wasn't ready to look at directly. Not yet. She let it go. For now. The safe house was a row house in Bridgeport. 3 stories. Brick. Indistinguishable from the 14 identical houses on either side of it. The block was residential and quiet, the kind of neighborhood where people kept to themselves because that was the contract. I don't ask about you, you don't ask about me. Lucien pulled the truck into an alley behind the property, killed the engine, and they went in through the back door. Inside, clean, sparse, lived in enough to not look abandoned. A kitchen with food in the cabinets. A main room with a couch and 2 chairs and a table. A single bedroom. A bathroom. And in the second bedroom, which Serafina found when she checked the floor plan by instinct, a second communication setup, laptop, encrypted radio, a printer, and a wall map. Smaller than the estate's underground room but clearly maintained. Someone came here regularly, kept it operational. She came back downstairs. Lucien was at the kitchen table with the laptop open and his phone beside him. He was typing fast and not looking up. Elena's on her way, he said. She has a second copy of the core files, encrypted backup. And the original files, the evidence room? He stopped typing. The fire, she said. His hands came off the keyboard. Lucien. The fire was targeted, he said. East wing. That's where the primary server backup was housed. The evidence, 3 years of— is gone, he said. Yes. She sat down across from him. The word gone sat between them on the table like something broken and too heavy to move. 3 years. Every photograph, every wire transfer record, every name and date and cross-referenced connection, every piece of the case that would have been enough to end Damien Viscari permanently through federal channels, without another shot fired. Gone. Because Nico Carrera had known exactly where it was and had given Viscari 40 minutes to prepare a strike team and a targeted ignition. The name, she said. Calvert. What I found last night. I transmitted it to a contact at the FBI field office before the attack started, he said. 20 minutes before. It went through. Something in her chest loosened slightly. One thread of it, at least. So they have Calvert. They have the name. Without the supporting documentation to contextualize it, it's a lead, not a case. He looked at her. Everything else is what's in your head. Your memory. 6 years of it. She understood what he wasn't saying. The documentation was gone. The digital evidence was ash. The structure of the case existed now only in the fragments she could reconstruct from memory, and in whatever Elena was bringing, and in whatever could be rebuilt from secondary sources. I can remember most of it, she said. Most of it isn't enough. Then I'll remember all of it. He looked at her for a long moment. You can't just— I have a photographic memory, she said. Not proud, just factual. I didn't know what it was when I was a child. I just thought everyone remembered things the way I did. It's not perfect. I have to have seen something, read it, not just heard it. But the financial records, the transfer sheets, the names Nolan left on his desk, I read them. Every time I was near them, I read them because it was the only thing I could do that he couldn't take away. He went very still. How detailed, he said. Tell me a company name from the files. Pinnacle Meridian Group. Without pausing. Registered in Delaware. Account number ending in 7742. Received transfers on the 8th of every month from a holding company called Lakeview Asset Partners. The average transfer was $340,000. In 14 months, it received a total of $4,760,000. I saw that sheet on Nolan's desk in February, 8 months ago. He was reviewing it at the kitchen table and left it when his phone rang. Lucien stared at her. There are 11 more like that, she said, and I can tell you the margin notes on at least 6 of them because Nolan wrote in the margins and his handwriting was sloppy but legible. The silence in the kitchen was of a particular quality. The quality of a situation rearranging itself around a new fact. Then Elena arrived. She came through the back door at 4:15 in the morning with a hard drive in her coat pocket, dried blood on her right sleeve that she did not explain, and an expression that communicated she had come through something difficult and had every intention of dealing with it after more pressing things were resolved. She looked at Serafina first, then Lucien. "Nico's gone," Elena said. "Took one of the boats from the dock, east toward Indiana." "How long ago?" "The attack was a distraction," Elena said. "By the time the perimeter was secure, he'd been gone 40 minutes. He had 40 minutes from the start. He planned it to the minute." Elena set the hard drive on the table. "This is the secondary backup, 40% of the primary files. The rest—" "We know," Lucien said. Elena sat down. For the first time since Serafina had met her, she looked tired. Not physically. Somewhere deeper. The tiredness of a person absorbing a betrayal they should have seen and didn't. "There's something else," Elena said. Lucien looked at her. Elena's eyes moved to Serafina, then back. "The contact at the FBI field office, the one you sent the Calvert information to. Doyle. Doyle was arrested 2 hours ago. His home was searched. He's being held on corruption charges." Elena paused. The charges were filed by a federal prosecutor with documented ties to Viscari's legal team. The dominoes fell in Serafina's mind one at a time. The FBI contact, gone. The evidence files, ash. The 15-year ally, vanished on a boat toward Indiana. And Viscari still out there, operational, protected by the same corrupted legal infrastructure that had been insulating him for years. "He's cleaning the board," Lucien said. His voice was very quiet. "He knows the timeline has changed. He's not waiting anymore. He stopped. Elena said it for him. "He's finishing it, before anything can be rebuilt." Which meant Viscari was moving. Which meant whatever window had existed, whatever patient, careful, systematic case had been under construction for 3 years, was closing. Maybe already closed. Lucien stood up, walked to the window, stood with his back to both of them, looking at the alley, the narrow strip of city visible between brick walls. Serafina watched his back, watched the set of his shoulders. She could see it happening in real time. The strategic mind running the new variables, calculating what remained, what was possible, what the geometry of the situation now looked like with the board reset. What remained? Her memory. Elena's partial backup. The Calvert name, transmitted before the assault, sitting somewhere in the FBI system, waiting for someone uncorrupted to pick it up. And Lucien himself. His contacts, his resources, whatever pieces of his network hadn't been touched by Nico's hands. What was possible, she didn't know yet. But she was watching him figure it out. What the geometry looked like a man who had lost his methodical approach and would now have to do something messier. Something faster, something that couldn't be built from evidence and wire transfer records and patient surveillance. He turned around. "I need to reach Viscari directly," he said. Elena's expression didn't change, but Serafina saw her hands tighten on the table. "That's not a plan," Elena said. "That's walking into I know what it is." "Lucien. He has the Calvert name, but he doesn't have context. He doesn't know how much we've rebuilt or how fast. If he thinks we're crippled, he'll surface to confirm the kill. He's that kind of man. He needs to see the damage." Lucien picked up his phone. "I can make him surface. By offering yourself. By offering information. A meeting. A negotiation." Something ugly moved behind his eyes. "He'll think it's surrender. He'll come." And then? He didn't answer that directly. He looked at the hard drive on the table. At Serafina's face. At Elena. "There's someone Viscari's been trying to locate for 3 years," he said. "A woman who worked inside his organization. She escaped in 2021. She went deep underground." He paused. "She was there when Mara was taken. She knows everything. The structure, the hierarchy, every name Viscari's organization has ever used. And she kept records, physical records, off any network, off any server." "Where is she?" Serafina asked. "I know where she is," Lucien said. "I've known for 2 years. I was protecting her, keeping her away from this until the case was ready." He set the phone down. "The case isn't going to be ready, so we go to her. If Viscari finds out you're moving toward her, he'll move faster, which is why we moved tonight." He looked at Serafina. "And why I need you to decide right now whether you're in this or you're out of it. Because out means Elena takes you somewhere isolated, and you wait this out. It means you come with me. You use what's in your memory to help me reconstruct enough of the case to leverage what she has. And you accept that this is now moving at a speed and in a direction I can't fully control. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a car passing on the street outside. Serafina thought about the safe room corridor, the figure moving through the dark toward a door he shouldn't have known about. She thought about running toward the sound of gunfire because there was no other direction. She thought about 8 weeks, how close she had been to becoming one of the photographs on Lucian's wall, a face with a date and a reference number. She thought about Mara, 18 years old, smiling at something outside the frame. "I'm in," she said. Lucian nodded once. He picked up the phone and made the first of a series of calls that would, by morning, set in motion the most dangerous sequence of events in his carefully violent life. Elena looked at Serafina across the table. There was something in Elena's eyes that had not been there before. Not warmth, exactly, but the specific recognition of one survivor identifying another. A slight inclination of the head that meant nothing and everything. Serafina looked back at the wall where Lucian had spread Elena's partial backup files while he talked on the phone. She started reading. At 5:20 in this morning, Lucien's phone buzzed with an incoming message. He read it. His face did something complicated. He held the phone out to Elena first. Elena read it, set the phone down, pressed her lips together. He held it out to Serafina. She read it. 3 sentences. No sender name. The number was a burner, already dead by the time they traced it. But the message was constructed with the specific, intimate knowledge of someone who knew Lucian's history in detail. "I know where you're going. I know who she is. Biscari already has a team moving toward her location. You have 4 hours. And Nico, not an attack, a warning, which was worse, because a warning from a man who had spent 15 years at Lucien's side and then burned 3 years of his life's work to the ground meant one of 2 things. Either Nico's betrayal was more complicated than it appeared, tangled with something older and darker than a simple sale, or he had sent the warning because he needed Lucian to reach the woman first, which meant Nico had his own reasons for wanting Biscari dismantled. Reasons he hadn't shared. Reasons that made what he'd done tonight not a betrayal, but a move in a game none of them had understood the rules of. 4 hours. Serafina looked at Lucian. "Drive," she said. He was already moving toward the door. They drove south with the city still dark around them and 4 hours burning in the back of every thought like a fuse nobody could reach. Lucian drove the way he did everything. Controlled, economical, no movement wasted. But Serafina could see the difference from earlier. His jaw was set at a different angle. His right hand on the wheel gripped it fractionally tighter than necessary, the medical tape on his knuckles pulling against the skin. He was angry. Not the cold operational anger she'd watched him carry since the estate. Something raw, something that had a name, Nico, and that he was refusing to speak out loud because speaking it out loud would make it real in a way he wasn't ready for at 5:30 in the morning, with 4 hours left and a woman somewhere in southern Illinois who didn't know that Biscari's people were already moving toward her. Elena was in the back seat with the hard drive and a laptop, working in silence, the blue screen light carving deep shadows under her eyes. Outside, the city gave way to interstate, the skyline dropping behind them as they moved southwest, Chicago's glow shrinking in the rear-view mirror to an amber smear against the cloud base. "Her name," Serafina said. Not a question, a prompt. "Vera Stahl," Lucian said. She was Vescry's operations manager. Midwest routing, safe house coordination, documentation. She ran the actual logistics while he ran the relationships. He paused. She was 23 when she went to work for him. She didn't know what the organization was when she started. She thought she was working for a transportation company. By the time she understood, she'd been inside for 2 years and knew too much to walk away. But she did walk away. She ran. 2021. She took physical copies of everything she could carry. Routing sheets, safe house addresses, personnel files, contact lists. The kind of documentation that doesn't exist on servers because Biscari was careful about servers. Another pause. She reached out to me 8 months after she disappeared. She wanted to trade, her documentation for protection. I gave her protection. I was building the case to use the documentation when the time was right. And Nico knew about her. Nico knew she existed. He didn't know where. Or I thought he didn't. His jaw tightened. I thought wrong. Serafina looked at the highway ahead, the flat dark of the Illinois interior, the occasional bloom of a gas station or a fast food sign against the black. Tell me what you're walking into, she said. The actual plan. Not the version where everything works. He glanced at her. You said in or out, she said. I said in. That means I need to think, not be managed. A beat. Then, Vera's location is a property outside of Kankakee, a horse farm, 11 acres, registered to an LLC with no connection to my network. She's been there 14 months. 2 people I trust are stationed with her. Former military, vetted, loyal. He kept his eyes on the road. If Vescari's team is moving, they're coming from the south or east. He has infrastructure in Indiana and down through central Illinois. We're coming from the north. We have a time advantage, but not terrain advantage. That's what sense. How many in his team? Unknown. Best guess. 6 to 10. He uses small teams for extractions. Quick. Mobile, low signature. And you're 2 people at the farm, plus whatever we bring, which is us, and whatever Elena can pull from the network in the next 3 hours. He checked the mirror. She's working on it, from the back seat without looking up from the laptop. I have 2 people in Joliet who can be in Kankakee in 90 minutes, and 1 in Champaign who's closer, but, a pause, he's unpredictable. Use the Joliet too, Lucian said, already called. Serafina turned to look at Elena. The woman was typing with 2 fingers on each hand, fast and precise, the laptop balanced on the hard drive on her knees. There was something almost mechanical about her efficiency. Not cold, but trained. Like someone who had spent decades watching emergencies arrive and had learned to process them as logistics problems rather than emotional events. How did you get the blood on your sleeve? Serafina asked. Elena didn't look up. One of Vescari's men tried to stop me leaving the estate. And? He didn't. Serafina turned back to the road. They drove. The farm outside Kankakee appeared at the end of a gravel road that came off a county highway, marked by a hand-painted sign advertising hay and boarding. The road was a quarter-mile long, bordered by old split-rail fencing that had given up being straight some years ago. The property beyond it was dark. No exterior lighting, no movement visible. 2 outbuildings, a barn, and a main structure that had been built to look like a farmhouse, but had the proportions of something that had been modified. Windows set too high, doors too heavy, the kind of retrofitting that said the person inside had thought carefully about sightlines and entry points. Lucien killed the headlights 100 yards out, coasted to a stop at the property line. He picked up his phone, called a number. It rang 4 times, answered on the 5th. It's me, Lucian said. Status? A man's voice, tight. We have movement on the east tree line, started about 20 minutes ago, 2, maybe 3. We've been holding position, waiting for your call. We're at the north end of the driveway. 2 vehicles. No, 1 vehicle, gray pickup. He looked at Serafina. Vera. She knows. She's ready. Ready how? She has the files on her. She said if anyone comes through that door who isn't you, she burns them. Lucian closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Tell her not to burn anything. He ended the call. Serafina was already checking the weapon she'd taken from the garage. Magazine seated, safety off, chambered. She handled it with the particular carefulness of someone who didn't know guns intimately but understood consequences. Lucien watched her for a second. Have you ever... No, she said, but I'm a fast learner. He didn't tell her not to come. She noted that. Elena stayed with the vehicle. Not asked, decided. She pulled the laptop onto the passenger seat, produced a handgun from somewhere inside her coat, and positioned herself so she could see both the road behind them and the property ahead. She looked like someone who had done this before, more than once. Lucien and Serafina moved up the driveway on foot, keeping to the left side close to the fence line, out of the open center. The gravel was loose and announced every step, so they moved in the grass at the fence's edge, slower but quieter. The air was cold and smelled of soil and manure and the particular damp of flat Midwestern land at pre-dawn. Halfway up the driveway, Lucian stopped. He put a hand on her arm. pointed. At the east side of the main house, barely visible, a shape against the dark. Still. Then moving, low, deliberate, angled toward the side door. One person, more behind probably in the tree line. Lucian pressed close to her ear. His voice was barely breath. "I'm going right, along the barn. You stay here until I signal. If anything comes from the road end, you move to the barn door. Do not go inside the house until I'm with you." She wanted to argue. She didn't. Not because she deferred to him automatically. That time was finished. But because he knew this terrain and she didn't, and this wasn't the moment for pride. He moved. She stayed. She watched the shape at the east side of the house. It had stopped. Whoever it was, they'd seen or heard something. They were pressing flat to the exterior wall, weapon up, assessing. Then a second shape appeared from the tree line. And a third. She counted. 3 on the east. And from the south, along the fence line that bordered the far pasture, 2 more silhouettes moving parallel to the house. 5. At minimum. She kept her eyes on the east figures, and her back to the fence, and her weapon in both hands and her finger outside the trigger guard, the way she'd been told once in a movie and had filed away because some information lodges regardless of how useless you expect it to be. Then everything happened at once. The lights inside this house went on, all of them, blazing, every window suddenly lit. And in the same moment the east door burst open, and Lucien's guard came through it firing, drawing the 3 east figures into movement. And Lucien came around the far corner of the barn at a dead run and hit the closest of them before anyone could recalibrate, and the farm exploded into noise. Serafina ran for the barn door. She hit it hard, shoved through. Inside, horses moving in their stalls, panicked by the sound, their hooves hitting wood in urgent rhythms, the smell of hay and manure and animal fear. Dim interior light from a single overhead bulb that swung slightly when the door banged open. At the far end of the barn, a woman stood behind a workhorse stall, one hand gripping the rail, the other holding a thick manila folder against her chest like it was a physical shield. Mid-30s. Brown hair pulled back hard. Small. Built like someone who had been lean for a long time from stress rather than intention. Her eyes were very pale, gray-green, the color of lake ice. And they went to Serafina immediately, assessing in a single sweep. "You're not Lucien," she said. "He's outside." Serafina moved toward her, keeping low, the barn door still swinging at her back. "Vera Stahl." "Who are you?" "Serafina Vale. I've been living with Nolan Graves for 6 years." Something shifted in Vera's face. Recognition. Not of the name, of the category. One of Viscari's pipelines. "I was going to be moved in 8 weeks. Lucien got me out." She reached the stall. Vera hadn't moved back. Good sign. "I have financial records memorized. Lucien needs what you have. Together, it rebuilds the case." Gunfire outside. Close. 2 shots, then a pause, then 3 more in quick succession, the sound bouncing off the outbuildings and arriving from different directions so it was impossible to count sources. Vera's grip on the folder tightened. "How many did they send?" Vera asked. "We counted 5. Maybe more." "They'll have more." Vera's voice was flat. She'd made these calculations before. "They always send more than you count. Viscari uses a visible team as the count and a quiet team as the actual move. You count 5, there are 8. You count 8, there are 12. Serafina absorbed this. "Then we need to be somewhere else. The filing is in this folder and in here." Vera pressed 2 fingers against her temple. 3 years of it. I don't go anywhere without both. "I'm not asking you to leave either." A crash from outside. Something heavy. Then a voice. Lucien's, unmistakable, calling a name Serafina didn't recognize. A guard name, short, 2 syllables. No response. The silence after was worse than the gunfire. Then the barn's side entrance, not the main door Serafina had come through, a smaller one on the south wall she hadn't seen in the dim, shuttered once and then opened. A man came through it. Heavy-set, tactical vest, weapon leading. He swept the barn in one professional motion and found them in 2 seconds. Serafina fired. She'd aimed for the center mass the way every instinct told her to, the way the gun pointed naturally when her arms extended and her body squared and the shot went left. She felt it go left even before the recoil. And it hit the wooden post 6 inches from his right shoulder. close enough that he flinched backward, lost his footing in the loose hay on the barn floor, and went down on one knee. She was already moving. She grabbed Vera's arm and they went the only direction available, deeper into the barn, past the panicking horses, through the door at the far end that opened onto a back paddock, cold air hitting them as they came through, the ground soft and dark beneath their feet. Behind them, the man was back up. She could hear him. The paddock was fenced. Ahead, 200 feet of open ground, and then a fence line and then dark fields beyond. To the left, the back of the main house. To the right, more fence, and past it the shape of the second outbuilding. She pulled Vera right. They hit the fence at a run. Vera went over it first, athletic, fast, clearly not the first fence she'd crossed in a hurry. Serafina went over after and felt her heel tear completely open, the cut from 3 days ago ripping wider, and the pain went up her leg like an electrical current, and she nearly went down but didn't because not going down was the only thing she knew how to do with absolute certainty. The outbuilding was a machinery shed, half open on the south side, housing a tractor and various equipment she couldn't identify in the dark. They pressed into the shadows behind the tractor, and Serafina turned and watched the paddock. The man from the barn came through the back door. He was scanning. Not running, moving with method, the weapon up, using the shadows rather than fighting them. Professional, patient. Then from the direction of the main house came 3 gunshots, then shouting, then a sound she couldn't categorize, something large and fast, then quiet, then Lucien's voice, 50 feet away, in the paddock, not loud, controlled. Serafina. She exhaled through her teeth. Here, she said, just loud enough. He appeared at the fence, came over it in one movement, and was beside them in the shed's shadow in 4 seconds. His left arm was hanging differently than it should, not obviously broken, but held close, guarded, the way you hold something that you're protecting from further contact. His face was... She stopped herself from cataloging it. There wasn't time. How bad? She asked, looking at the arm. Functional. He looked at Vera, then at the folder. His expression did something she'd seen once before in the underground room when she'd given him the Calvert name, that fractional opening, quickly sealed. Vera, he said. Lucien. Her voice was careful, not cold, the particular tone of someone who owes a debt and is aware of it. You look terrible. We need to move, now, east fence, into the fields. There's a road a half-mile out. My car's at the... Your car is compromised. My car is at the north end of the driveway with Elena. He was already moving. The guard at the east side. Reyes is down, Vera said. She said it flat, without decoration, the way you say things that hurt too much to perform. I saw it from the window. Lucien's step didn't break. But something in his shoulders did. A barely visible thing, a tension that arrived and was immediately buried. Marcus? He asked. I don't know. They moved through the dark, through the machinery shed's open south side, and across a narrow strip of ground to the east fence. 3 fences between them and the road. Vera moved well. Lucien moved through the pain in his arm with the controlled determination of someone applying willpower as a direct physical force. Serafina moved on a heel that had soaked through her boot. She didn't mention it. The fields were flat and wet and very dark. No moon. The clouds had come back, pressing down on the landscape, and the only light was the distant amber of a farmhouse somewhere north and the pale smear of the highway to the east. They moved in a loose line, Lucien leading, Vera in the center, Serafina covering the rear with the weapon she'd now decided she was keeping. Behind them, from the direction of the farm, a single gunshot. Then silence. Then voices. 2, 3, too far to resolve into words, but loud enough to confirm that the farm was occupied. They'll have the road staked, Vera said quietly. I know which road they'll stake, Lucien said. It's not this one. He led them to a 2-lane road that came off the county highway from a different angle, down a gravel easement that ran along an irrigation ditch. Elena was already there. Somehow, Elena was already there. The gray pickup idling on the shoulder, the laptop closed, the handgun in her lap. She looked at them through the windshield with an expression that communicated both relief and the immediate decision to not ask questions until later. They got in. Lucien in the passenger seat this time, his left arm against the door. Serafina and Vera in the back. Elena didn't ask. She pulled onto the road. "Marcus?" Elena said. "Unknown." A pause. Then Elena nodded once and drove. Vera sat beside Serafina in the back seat with the folder on her knees. She looked out the window for a moment, watching the dark fields pass, and then she opened the folder and began checking its contents by feel, page by page, her fingers moving with the intimacy of someone touching things they've protected for 3 years. "Tell me what Lucian told you," Vera said quietly. "About you? About the case? Where you are? What's left?" Serafina told her, efficiently, without self-pity or dramatization. The attack on the estate, the burned evidence room, Nico's betrayal, the FBI contact taken down, the 4-hour warning. Vera listened without interrupting, her hand still moving through the folder. When Serafina finished, Vera said, "The Calvert name. You gave that to him." "Yes. Calvert is real. He runs the physical transfer network out of a hub in Gary, Indiana. 3 locations, rotating weekly." She pulled a sheet from the folder. "This has the addresses, all 3, and the rotation schedule." Serafina took the sheet and looked at it in the dim light. Then she closed her eyes and read it from memory. When she opened her eyes, she handed it back. "I have it," she said. Vera looked at her. The pale eyes, the particular assessment of someone who had spent years reading people for survival. "Good," she said finally. And that was enough. In the front seat, Lucien was on the phone. He had it pressed to his ear with his right hand, his left arm still held against the door, and he was speaking in a measured, deliberate voice to someone Serafina didn't recognize. "I need 48 hours, he said, "and I need you to find a federal contact that Viscari hasn't reached." A pause. "I know what I'm asking. I'm asking you to do it anyway." Another pause, longer. "Because what I'm giving you is going to end a career, his or yours, depending on which side you're standing on. Pick a side." He hung up. Elena glanced at him. "Who was that?" "A journalist." Elena's expression suggested this was not the most reassuring answer. "She's clean," Lucien said. "I've known her 11 years. Viscari doesn't reach into press. He doesn't like the attention that comes from touching it. A journalist can't prosecute. No. But a journalist with Vera's documentation, Serafina's financial records, and the Calvert information can create enough public record that prosecution becomes politically necessary rather than institutionally optional." He looked at the road. "If the courts are compromised, we go over the courts." Vera from the back seat. "Risky." "Everything is risky now." "When isn't it?" "When you have 3 years of evidence and an intact FBI contact," Lucien said. "We don't have either. We go with what we have." The car was quiet for a moment. Then Serafina said, "There's a second problem." Lucien turned his head. "The warning from Nico," she said. "He told us Viscari was moving toward Vera. He gave us 4 hours." "Yes. He could have let Viscari take her. He could have not sent the message." She kept her voice level, working the logic out loud. "He didn't. So whatever he gained by burning your estate and your files and compromising your FBI contact, he drew a line at Vera." Lucien said nothing. "Which means either he has limits," she continued, "or Vera's documentation contains something that destroys Nico as well as Viscari, and he needs it to stay hidden." Vera had gone very still in the seat beside her. Serafina turned to look at her. Vera was looking at the folder, not at anyone else, at the folder. "Vera," Serafina said. A long silence. The fields outside gave way to subdivisions, scattered lights, the first outer edges of civilization spreading back toward the city. "There are names at the personnel files," Vera said slowly. "People who facilitated Viscari's operations in various capacities. Some of them knew what they were facilitating. Some of them—" She stopped, started again. "Some of them were placed inside other organizations specifically to provide access, information, cover." Lucien's voice from the front seat was absolutely controlled. "Vera, there's a name in there," Vera said. "I've known it for 3 years. I didn't tell you because—" She stopped again. "Because I didn't know what you'd do. And because the name is connected to Mara, to the night she was taken." The car was very quiet. "Tell me," Lucien said. And in the silence before Vera spoke, Serafina felt the entire weight of what was coming press against the air in the car like a physical thing, dense and irreversible. The specific gravity of a truth that cannot be untold once it leaves the mouth. The headlights cut through the dark. The city grew brighter ahead of them. And Vera Stahl opened her mouth and said the name that would either destroy Lucien Moretti or finally set him free. Nico didn't just betray you, Vera said. He was there that night, at the bus station in Joliet. He was the one who told Vescari's people which bus Mara was on, which terminal, which time. The car didn't slow. Elena kept the speed exactly constant. The road kept coming, but in the passenger seat, Lucian's right hand, the good hand, the steady hand, the hand that had thrown one punch in an apartment 3 days ago and broken a man's nose with a precision that never wavered. That hand tightened on his knee until the knuckles went white under the medical tape. Serafina watched it. She watched him not break. She watched him hold the most devastating thing a person can be told, that the man he trusted was the man who handed his sister to her killers. And she watched him hold it, compress it, convert it into something cold and functional and forward-facing rather than backward and consuming. It took 11 seconds. She counted. Then he picked up the phone again. "Change of destination," he said to Elena. "I need to find Nico before Vescari does." Elena said, "Why?" "Because Nico sent that warning for a reason. And because if Vescari finds out that Nico warned us, Nico is already dead unless we reach him first." He paused. "And because I need to look him in the face when I ask him why." Nobody argued. The pickup accelerated into the pre-dawn dark, the city's glow pulling them north and east like gravity. And somewhere behind them, the farm outside Kankakee was occupied by men who would find nothing they needed. And somewhere ahead of them, in a city built on ambition and violence and the specific ruthlessness of people who chose power over everything, Damien Vescari was still breathing, still operational, still the man at the center of everything that had been taken. But the perimeter was closing, not from the outside in, from the inside out, the way the most complete dismantlings always work. Not with evidence rooms and federal contacts and 3 years of patient architecture, with memory and burned paper and a woman who had run from a monster and kept his secrets in a folder pressed to her chest for 3 years, and another woman who remembered every number she had ever read, and a man who was about to come face to face with the oldest wound of his life. The truck moved. The city came closer. And in Gary, Indiana, in a warehouse that smelled of river water and cold metal, a man named Calvert made a phone call to a number that rang. In Gary, Indiana, in a warehouse that smelled of river water and cold metal, a man named Calvert picked up a phone that never finished ringing. Because at the moment the call connected, the warehouse door came open. Not with a bang, not with a breach charge or a shouted command. It opened the way Lucien Moretti opened everything, quietly, deliberately, with the particular authority of a man who has decided the room belongs to him before he enters it. Calvert was 53 years old, built like someone who had once been physically formidable, and had since converted that frame into something softer, but no less dangerous. The kind of body that suggested capacity rather than display. He had a phone in one hand and a gun on the table in front of him, and he looked at the 3 people who came through his door at 6:40 in the morning and made the calculation that most people make when faced with a man like Lucien. The calculation that resistance had a cost he couldn't currently afford. He set the phone down. "You're Moretti," he said. "Put the gun on the floor," Lucien said. Calvert looked at the weapon on the table, then at Lucien's right hand, already raised, then at Serafina, standing to Lucien's left, holding her own weapon with the practiced stillness of someone who had recently discovered they could do this and had decided to keep doing it. Then at Vera Stahl, standing behind both of them, holding the folder. He bent slowly and put the gun on the floor and kicked it away. "I want to know where Vescari is right now," Lucien said. "I don't know where he is right now." "You called him 20 minutes ago." Calvert's jaw tightened. "You have my phones tapped." "I have everything. I've had your location for 3 days. I was saving it." Lucien stepped deeper into the warehouse. It was large and mostly empty. The operational infrastructure had been cleared recently. Recently enough that the outlines of crates were still visible in the dust on the concrete floor. Vescari was moving things, dismantling, covering. "He's pulling out of the Midwest. You're helping him move." I manage logistics. You manage the routing of human beings, Serafina said. Calvert looked at her. Something passed through his expression, not guilt, not quite. More like the face a man makes when he hears the name of something he decided a long time ago not to call by its right name. Where is the transfer hub? She said. Gary has 3 locations. They rotate weekly. Where is this week's? His eyes moved to Vera. Vera didn't move. I know who you are, Calvert said to her. He's been looking for you for 3 years. Then he'll be glad to hear I've been found, Vera said, after the arrests. Calvert looked at the folder in her arms. He looked at it the way people look at things they understand are going to end something. That folder doesn't mean anything without federal support. You've got nothing. Your FBI contact is in a holding cell, and— Which location? Serafina said again. He looked at her. He seemed to be measuring something. Her steadiness, the quality of her attention, whether she was performing or present. She was present. 6 years of living with a man who used her fear as a management tool had burned the performance out of her. What remained was something simpler and harder. Calvert told them the address. Lucien was already on the phone before the last syllable finished. What followed moved at a speed that felt, to Serafina, like watching a machine that had been building pressure for years finally release. Lucien made 4 calls in 8 minutes from the warehouse floor, while Vera and Serafina stood over Calvert and Elena waited outside with the truck. The calls were short, coded, directed at people whose names Serafina didn't know. People in federal agencies who were not Doyle, who had no connection to Doyle, who existed in layers of Lucien's network that Nico Carrera had never had access to because Lucien, it turned out, had built redundancies into his own system that even his closest ally hadn't known about. Not because he'd suspected Nico, because Lucien Moretti trusted the architecture more than he trusted any individual inside it, even himself. The journalist, a woman named Carla Reyes, who wrote for a national investigative outlet and had been sitting on pieces of the Vescari story for 2 years without enough documentation to publish, received a secure file transfer at 6:58 in the morning. The file contained the contents of Vera's folder, photographed page by page on Elena's phone, in the back of the pickup during the drive from Kankakee, plus 3 pages of financial records that Serafina had reconstructed from memory and typed on Elena's laptop in the same vehicle, her fingers moving over the keys with the particular fluency of a person transcribing from an internal document rather than composing. Carla Reyes called back in 11 minutes. This is real, she said. It's been real for 6 years, Lucien said. I need 24 hours. You have 12. After 12 hours, events will overtake the story and you'll be writing about what already happened. Get ahead of it or get behind it. He paused. You've been behind it for 2 years. A silence. Then, 12 hours. The transfer hub was a warehouse on the south end of Gary, 3 blocks from the waterfront, registered to a freight company that existed on paper and nowhere else. By the time Lucien's federal contacts, 2 agents from a regional organized crime task force that had been quietly building a parallel case against Vescari for 18 months, stonewalled at every turn by the same corrupted prosecutor's office now holding Doyle, received the address and the supporting documentation. It was 7:30 in the morning and the warehouse had 6 people inside it who were not freight workers. The agents moved at 8:15. Serafina was not there for the arrest. None of them were. Lucien had insisted on that, not out of caution, but out of a more complicated instinct, the instinct of a man who understood that some endings need to be clean, and that his presence at a federal operation would contaminate the record before the ink dried. They were in a diner 4 miles away, sitting in a corner booth, when Lucien's phone buzzed with a 2-word message from a number that existed only for single-use communications. He read it, set the phone face down on the table. It's done, he said. Vera closed her eyes. Just for a moment. 1 breath in, 1 breath out. Elena poured coffee into a mug she hadn't touched and looked at it. Serafina sat with both hands around her own cup and felt, not triumph. Something more complicated than triumph. Something that sat in the chest like the last note of a song you didn't realize you'd been listening to, fading but real. Vescari, she said. He wasn't at the hub. He was never going to be at the hub. Lucien picked up his coffee. His left arm was resting on the table now, less guarded. Someone had wrapped it properly in the parking lot of the diner using a first aid kit from the truck, Elena working quickly with the efficiency of long practice, while Lucien sat on the tailgate and said nothing. Not broken. Deep bone bruise. Functional, as he'd said, but she could see the effort that functionality cost him in the controlled way he moved it. Vescari doesn't stand near operations. He stands adjacent to them. He's been running this organization for 15 years without his fingerprints on a single physical act. Then he walks. He walks from this. That's not... She stopped herself. I know what it's not. He looked at her directly. No management in it. No distance. Just the flat truth. The hub gives the task force enough to dismantle the operation and take Calvert and the 6 people inside. Vera's documentation gives them the structure, safe houses, routing, border contacts. Your financial records give them the money trail. That's 3 to 5 years of prosecution on the people who ran it day to day. He paused. Vescari is untouchable by direct evidence. He always has been. That's why I spent 3 years building a case that approached from the outside in. And now? Now Carla Reyes publishes in 12 hours. Every name in Vera's documentation. Every company in your financial records. The Calvert connection. The network structure. All of it in a national publication attributed to documentation provided by federal sources and corroborated by 2 witnesses whose identities will not be disclosed. He set down the coffee. Vescari can survive federal pressure. He's done it before. He cannot survive becoming a public story that 20 journalists across the country start pulling threads on. It takes longer, Serafina said. Yes. He's still out there while it takes longer. Yes. She looked at the table, at her coffee, at the grain of the laminate surface that some anonymous person had chosen for a diner booth 40 years ago, without any idea it would one day be the surface upon which someone absorbed the particular specific incompleteness of justice. But the women, she said, the ones currently in the pipeline, the task force at the hub will find them. His voice shifted on that sentence. Not softer, but with a quality that said this was the part that mattered most, the part everything else was structured to protect. That's the real reason for the hub. Not Vescari, the people inside. She looked at him. That's always been the reason, he said. She believed him. They found Nico at 10 in the morning, not through surveillance or intelligence. He found them, or rather, he made himself findable, parked outside the diner in a car Lucien recognized. A black sedan he'd given Nico 3 years ago as a practical gift, the kind of car that blended into every background. Nico was in the driver's seat. He didn't get out when the pickup pulled into the lot. He sat and waited. Lucien sat in the pickup for a long time after Elena killed the engine. Serafina watched him from the passenger seat, watched him look at the black sedan, at the shape of Nico through the windshield, the broad shoulders, the gray at the temples. You don't have to do this now, she said. Yes, I do. He got out. Serafina got out. He looked at her and she looked back, and he didn't tell her to stay in the vehicle. She walked with him to the sedan. She stood back while he opened the passenger door and got in, but she stood close enough to see both men through the glass. Nico looked at Lucien. Lucien looked at Nico. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The parking lot was ordinary around them. A woman with a stroller. A truck from a bread delivery company backing up to the diner's service entrance. The sounds of a Midwestern morning, indifferent and continuous. Then Nico said, I didn't know about Mara. Not before. Lucien's voice through the glass was barely audible. But after. A pause. After I knew. By then I was in it. How long had you been in it before she was taken? Silence. Nico. 2 years, Nico said. Vescari had something on my father. The old debts from before your father died. I was paying them back. He stopped. Started again. It started as information. Just information. Nothing that touched operations. And then it was more than information, and I couldn't... He stopped. There's no version of this that sounds like anything other than what it is. No, Lucien agreed. I told him about Mara because she was asking questions. She'd seen something at the dock in Joliet, and she was going to go to the police. Nico's voice was flat and steady, the voice of someone who has told himself this story enough times to have removed the inflection from it. I told Vescari she was a concern. I didn't tell him to take her. I told him she was a concern. You knew what he did with concerns. No answer. You knew what he did with concerns, Lucian said again. Yes, Nico said. I knew. The bread delivery truck finished backing up, and the driver got out and knocked on the diner's service door, and the door opened, and bread went inside, and life continued in all its ordinary completeness outside the black sedan, where a 15-year friendship was becoming a crime scene. Why the warning? Lucian said. Last night, 4 hours. Because I didn't want Vera dead. Nico looked at the steering wheel. Because there are people in that documentation whose suffering doesn't deserve to stay buried because I made bad decisions. Because... He stopped. Because Mara didn't deserve what happened to her. She didn't deserve any of it. And I've been carrying that since 2019, and I'm not carrying it anymore. You burned my evidence room, Lucian said. You gave Viscari everything he needed to hit the estate. Yes. You compromised Doyle. Yes. You handed him 3 years of work. Yes. Why? Nico finally looked at him. His eyes were red at the rims, not recent crying, the kind that comes from a night without sleep and with too much reckoning. Because he told me if I didn't, he'd take someone else. Not Vera, not you. He paused. Elena. The silence that followed was the longest one. Lucian looked at the windshield, at the parking lot, at Serafina standing outside, watching. He looked at her for a moment, and she saw in his face something she'd never seen there, the complete, unsupported weight of a person who has just run out of architecture. No plan, no calculation, no next step already prepared, just a man sitting in a car with the wreckage of 20 years around him. Then he looked back at Nico. There are federal agents outside the hub right now, Lucien said. The task force Viscari's been blocking for 18 months. They have enough from Vera's files to hold everyone they're currently processing, but they need testimony from someone inside, someone who has direct knowledge of the organization's structure and Viscari's role in it. He paused. Not just the operational people, Viscari himself. Nico understood. That puts you in a courtroom, Lucian said, in front of a prosecutor and a judge and a defense team that will dismantle every day of your life going back 30 years. I know what it means. It also means protection, identity, location, the whole arrangement. His jaw moved. I'll make the call. Why would you? Because you warned us. Because you drew a line somewhere, even if the line was in the wrong place for the wrong reasons. And because the people in those safe houses deserve for someone who actually knows where all the doors are to open them. He picked up his phone. After that, I don't know you. Nico looked at him. The full weight of what that meant moved through his face. 15 years. A West Side childhood. A father and a debt. And a long series of decisions that had each seemed, in the moment, survivable. Okay, Nico said. Lucian made the call. Viscari was arrested in the private departure lounge of a regional airport outside Indianapolis at 2 in the afternoon, 11 hours after the hub operation and 40 minutes before Carla Reyes' story went live. He was attempting to board a chartered flight to Cancun with 2 associates and a bag that contained, among other things, a false passport and $700,000 in mixed currencies. The arrest was made by 4 federal agents. Viscari did not resist. He was, by every account, completely calm. He looked at the lead agent and said nothing. He allowed the handcuffs. He sat in the transport vehicle with the expression of a man who was already calculating his next move. Because men like Damien Viscari always believed their next move existed, believed the machine of their influence was too large and too embedded to be fully dismantled by any single action. He was wrong about that. But it took 3 years to prove it. Serafina was not there for his arrest either. She was in the passenger seat of the gray pickup, heading north on Highway 57, when the notification came through on Elena's phone, and Elena read it aloud in the same flat, informational tone she used for everything. Serafina looked out the window at the flat Illinois farmland and felt the news arrive somewhere behind her sternum and sit there. She waited for something dramatic to happen inside her. It didn't. It was just information. True, real, important information. But the storm that had defined her last 6 years wasn't Viscari. It was smaller and more personal, and had been sitting in an apartment on Michigan Avenue, and that storm had already been cleared. What remained was the aftermath. the landscape after weather, which is quieter and stranger and more demanding than the weather itself. She thought about the photograph of Mara, the girl with the dark hair laughing at something outside the frame. She hoped wherever Mara was, the news arrived. They checked into a hotel in the South Loop that afternoon, not the estate. That would take time to repair and longer to feel safe again. 4 rooms, separate, clean, ordinary. The kind of hotel where nobody looks at you when you walk through the lobby because everyone there is equally tired and equally grateful for a door that locks. Serafina stood in the shower for 20 minutes and let the water run as hot as she could tolerate and watched the diluted rust color swirl down the drain from her heel and felt her body take inventory of everything it had absorbed in the last 5 days. The bruise on her arm, the split lip, nearly closed now. The heel, which a paramedic at the hub operations outer perimeter had properly stitched after Lucien quietly insisted. 3 cracked fingernails from the barn. A bruise across her left shoulder blade from the fence she'd gone over in the dark. She pressed her forehead against the shower tile and breathed. Then she got out. Dried off. Put on the clothes Elena had bought at a pharmacy on the way. Practical things, utilitarian, nothing chosen for anyone else's preference. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her own hands. She thought, I'm still here. Not as a victory, just as a fact. The most basic, durable fact available. There was a knock at her door 40 minutes later. She knew the knock. She opened the door. Lucien stood in the corridor. His left arm was in a proper sling now. The hospital, briefly, on the way, 3 hours ago while she waited in the lobby with Vera and Elena. His face was clean. He'd slept, she thought, for perhaps 2 hours. He looked like a man who had been emptied out and had not yet decided what to fill himself with. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. Come in, she said. He came in. Didn't sit. Stood near the window the way he always stood near windows, as though being able to see outside was a professional requirement he'd internalized so deeply it had become personal. The city was going about its ordinary afternoon below. Traffic. People. The indifferent machinery of a place that had been the stage for everything and would continue being a stage for whatever came next. Vera is with the task force, he said. Full cooperation. She'll be relocated when the testimony phase begins. He paused. She asked me to tell you. He stopped. What? She said you ran the wrong direction in that barn on purpose. She said a person running on instinct goes toward the exit. You ran toward her. He looked at the window. She said to tell you that mattered. Serafina said nothing. I want to tell you something, Lucien said. And I want to say it once and not manage it. She waited. I did bring you to the estate partly because of the case. That was true, and I should have said it before you heard it through a door. He turned from the window. His eyes met hers without evasion. It stopped being about the case probably around the time you sat down at my table at 3 a.m. and asked questions that made me reconsider my own conclusions. And it was definitely something else entirely by the time I came through a garage door and found you standing over an unconscious man with a steel bar in your hands. The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. I don't know what to do with that. I don't have a plan for it. That might be the most honest thing you've said to me, she said. It might be. She looked at him. At the sling, at the scar along his jaw and the healed asymmetry of his nose and the darkness under his eyes that was not just tonight, but years, accumulated and permanent. At the man who had arrived in 12 minutes and put a coat around her shoulders and demolished the architecture of her captivity and then rebuilt nothing in its place, leaving the space deliberately open, which was a kind of respect she hadn't received in long enough that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like. I don't have a plan either, she said. I don't know what I am outside of surviving. I don't know what I want when wanting something isn't dangerous. She said it evenly, not asking for consolation, just naming the territory, the way you name a landscape before you start to walk it. I think I need to figure that out before anything else. I know, he said. That might take a long time. I know. You're not a patient man. No. He looked at her. But I'm a man who knows when something matters enough to become one. The city moved outside the window. A siren somewhere, brief and fading. A pigeon on the ledge. She didn't reach for him. He didn't reach for her. But the space between them was no longer the cautious, managed distance of two people protecting themselves. It was something else, something smaller and warmer. The distance of two people who have survived the same storm from different positions and are now standing in the same aftermath, looking at the same changed landscape. That was enough. For now, it was enough. 3 months later, the federal prosecution of Damian Vescari's organization reached its first major hearing. Nico Carrera testified for 7 hours over 2 days in a closed proceeding, his identity protected, his voice altered in the official recording. His testimony provided direct linkage between Vescari and 17 documented cases of trafficking, 12 of which had previously been classified as voluntary disappearances. The prosecutor's office, a different one, in a different jurisdiction, brought in specifically to bypass the compromised infrastructure Vescari had built, described the testimony as the most comprehensive organizational disclosure in the history of Midwest trafficking prosecutions. Doyle was released. The corruption charges against him collapsed when the prosecutor who filed them was himself indicted, partly on the basis of financial records that a woman with a photographic memory had reconstructed from 6 years of unwanted observation in a Michigan Avenue apartment. Calvert took a plea. 12 years. The 3 rotating hubs in Gary were dismantled. 41 people were recovered from the network's active pipeline in the 48 hours following the hub operation. Some were found in transit, some in safe houses, some at border staging points that Vera Stahl's routing documents had identified with exact addresses. 41 people. Serafina learned the number from Carla Reyes's follow-up article, which she read on her laptop in the east wing of the Moretti estate. Repaired now, the structural damage addressed, the evidence room rebuilt on a different floor with different walls, smelling of new concrete and fresh paint, and the absence of 3 years of accumulated grief. She had moved back to the estate 6 weeks after the hotel, not because she had nowhere else to go. Elena had offered her 3 separate alternatives, each practical and secure. She'd moved back because she had work to do there. The foundation she had proposed, in a moment that felt far away now, a private recovery resource for women leaving violent situations, had found its first operational space in the estate's west wing, quietly, without announcement, serving 4 women in its first month and 7 in its second. She ran it, herself. With Elena's organizational efficiency and Lucian's resources and her own specific, hard-won understanding of what women in those situations needed that most formal institutions couldn't provide, which was primarily this: to be in a place where no one required them to explain their damage before they were allowed to begin repairing it. She was 26 years old, and she understood that she was building something in the ruins of what had been done to her, and she understood that this was not the same as healing, but it was adjacent to it. And adjacency was where everything started. On a Thursday evening in late winter, she was in the West Wing reviewing intake paperwork when she heard the estate's main door close and footsteps cross the foyer. She knew the footsteps. She knew the weight and rhythm of them, the way you come to know any sound that has repeatedly meant safety in the context of danger. She kept reading the paperwork. A knock at the West Wing door. 1 knock. Flat. "Come in," she said. Lucien stood in the doorway. He was in a coat, still damp from outside. It was raining, a light Chicago rain, the kind that doesn't announce itself. He looked at the papers on her desk, at the organized chaos of the room, folders and contact sheets and a whiteboard covered in her handwriting, at her. "You haven't eaten," he said. "I was going to. It's 8:30. I lost track." He came in, sat in the chair across from her desk, not backward, the way he used to, but forward, in the ordinary posture of a man who had stopped needing the armor of studied casualness. He'd been doing that more often, small shifts. She noticed them all. "How many this month?" he asked. 7. He was quiet for a moment. 7 women in a West Wing that had been, 6 months ago, a guest suite in a fortress. 7 women who had called their own versions of a number kept in a hidden phone and found their way to a door that opened. 41, she said, from the hub. "I know. Have you been tracking the relocations?" "Yes." "Are they, as far as we can reach them?" he said. "Yes, they're being taken care of." She looked at him. He looked back. In the months since January, the specific guardedness she'd first seen in him, the professional distance, the managed calm, had not disappeared but had become selective. something he chose rather than defaulted to. In her presence, he increasingly chose otherwise. It made him look different, not younger, more inhabited. Mara would have been 24, she said. She hadn't planned to say it. It arrived. Something moved in his face. He didn't shut it away. He let it be there for a moment. The grief, the age of it, the way it had become part of the structure of him rather than a wound in it. Yes, he said. She would have liked this, Serafina said. The West Wing, what it is now. He looked at the whiteboard, at the names on it, not full names, just first names, the way they operated for privacy. 7 first names in her handwriting. He looked at them for a long time. Yeah, he said. His voice was different on that one word, rougher, honest all the way down. She stood up from behind the desk, not because she'd decided to, because her body moved toward the thing that felt true. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of the desk beside his chair, close enough that their proximity was its own kind of statement, and she looked at the whiteboard with him. Neither of them spoke. Outside, the rain continued. Chicago did what Chicago did. Kept moving, kept making noise, kept being the complicated, violent, beautiful, indifferent city that it had always been. The lake sat in the dark at the edge of the property, patient as it had always been, holding the same water it had held the night she'd arrived in the back of a black SUV, broken and terrified and taking the first step of a journey she hadn't yet understood the shape of. Lucian's hand on the arm of the chair was close to hers. She didn't close the distance. She let it be there. That small remaining gap between two people who had both learned, in different ways and at enormous cost, that closing distance too fast was how you ended up somewhere you hadn't chosen. She let the gap exist, and she let it be exactly the size it needed to be. And she understood that the size of it would change on its own, in its own time, when both of them were ready. That understanding was something she'd built herself, from the rubble of 6 years, and no one had handed it to her, and no one could take it away. She was 26 years old. She was still here. Outside, the rain settled into something quieter. Not stopping, just becoming less urgent. The way weather changes when it's made its point. The 7 names on the whiteboard were written in her handwriting, and the lamp on the desk cast a warm, ordinary light across the room. And Damien Viscari was in a federal holding facility 3 states away, waiting for a trial that would not be over quickly or easily, but would be over. And the man sitting beside her had arrived in 12 minutes on the worst night of her life, and had never once asked her to be smaller than she was. She picked up the intake paperwork. She kept reading. He stayed. That was how it started. Not with a declaration, not with a moment that announced itself as meaningful. With a woman reading paperwork at 8:30 in the evening in a room that used to be empty and now held the evidence of lives being rebuilt, and a man who had nowhere better to be and knew it, staying without being asked, in the quiet that exists after every storm worth surviving. The rain came down. The city held. And in the west wing of a house that had been built as a fortress and was becoming something else entirely, the lamp burned steadily on.